I'd like to start with the following statement. When I sit in a room full of corporate leaders talking about bringing AI into their business, if I hear the following phrase, which happens a lot, we need to figure out a way to bring AI into our business, I'm almost guaranteed that project's going to fail. Right. So when you lead this conversation from a tech perspective, it's highly unlikely that we're not going to achieve the value that is intended from, at least the aspirational value that is expected from AI. So you know how this works. If you want to stay in touch and you've got questions afterwards, I'm more than happy to make time for you. Before I get into it, there's a couple of things that I do want to share. A couple of disclaimers I want to put up front. When it comes to, I'm not going to talk to you about the technology of artificial intelligence. Rather, I'm going to look at it with you through a business lens that focuses on commercial application and utility. That's how I see the world. I'm going to share with you data, quantified data that comes from reputable sources or from some of the research we've done. And then I'll also share with you some qualitative data based on our insights and observations based on the work that we do. It's also based on the fact that, on the information that we have now. We certainly don't pretend to be a futurist. And in actual fact, if you ever listen to a self-proclaimed futurist, you should invite them back in a couple of months' time to validate what they shared with you. All right. So, context. The work that we do typically focuses around listed entities, large organizations that have got a growth or a modernization challenge. So and what we try to do is infuse technology in some of the strategic choices they need to make. So for example, from a growth perspective, they infuse technology into their business in order to generate new generation propositions with new profit models, new customer models, new routes to market, etc., that gives them a distinctive advantage in the new markets they play, which are typically outside their core business. On the modernization side, we leverage technology to make the existing business more competitive, generate more revenue from its existing products, operate at a low cost point, and fundamentally change the relationship they have with their customers. In all instances, technology is used. We are not technologists. We don't implement technology, and there's a freedom that comes with that, because I can give the right advice and choice based on the best commercial outcome and not based on the technology that is of interest to me or the vendor that is of interest to me. So throughout the last 10, 15 years that we've been doing this, everyone says that the technology of the day is different. It's going to bring about significant change, and it's no different to AI. All right, so AI, without a doubt, is a technology that is going to fundamentally change how we live, work, and communicate. It's known as a general purpose technology. I'm sure you've heard that today, not to be confused with ChatGPT. Right? I've been naughty when I put that up. GPT in chat means something different to a general purpose technology. So general purpose technology ultimately is a very transformative technology. Think electricity, think computing. It is pervasively applicable across a variety of industries. It reshapes industries, it reshapes economies, it reshapes societies. It's pervasive, it's expandable, it's extendable, and it unlocks a tremendous amount of innovation. The thing that is pretty characteristic about general purpose technologies is that when they enter an economy, the incumbent's productivity starts to decline. So this is probably an illustration of what it looks like. That curve is the productivity of the incumbent. A general purpose technology enters the market. The incumbent is usually not the initial user of the technology. They typically resist the adoption of the technology. Their competitiveness drops as a result, productivity drops, wages drop, job losses incur, etc. And that level of performance continues until the point that if the incumbent is still trading and they adopt the technology and they become proficient in it, then ultimately their competitiveness improves. That period between the introduction of the technology and the adoption of the technology has been well researched for many decades, and it's referred to the Engels pause. It's referred to the Engels pause. The same thing is happening at the moment with AI. And by the way, when this happens, the players in the market blame the technology for the disruption of their business. The technology destroyed our business, disrupted our business. And just the other day, I was on stage with someone else that was incredibly negative about the technology. The technology disrupted our business. In this instance, they were blaming AI. The reality is that we're not experiencing a crisis of technology. We're experiencing a crisis of leadership. All right, so the technology doesn't progress like a virus. It's progressing because there's a tremendous amount of investment going in. People are investing in their careers, consumers are buying the products, etc. But we'll unpack that in a second. So when we talk about general purpose technologies, be it electricity, computing, and our AI, typically this is the spectrum of thought that we have. You've either got a Terminator mindset or you've got a Star Trek mindset. And on each spectrum, you've got mutual destruction on the left side, I think it is, and you've got mutual prosperity on the right side. And as you unpack this, you're probably somewhere along that timeline. The way I view it up front is I'm less dystopian about the technology. I think that if we're on the right side of change, you're going to generate more wealth, more prosperity, more jobs than ever before. I'm not saying it's going to be easy. I'm saying it's certainly possible. But having that possibilist mindset doesn't mean that you just accept things for what they are and it's sort of a laissez-faire approach and let the market play out. It means that you look at the possibility of what can happen, but you question everything and you approach it with a very structured, highly governed manner, always focused on value. I'm not interested in implementing the technology. I'm interested in extracting value. And that should be the narrative that we hold. So I want to come back to this crisis of technology versus crisis of leadership. So when a general purpose technology enters the market, we experience something called creative destruction. The old gets disrupted, the new comes in. We've seen this many times. So again, what I want to highlight is that it's not the technology itself that is destructive. It doesn't progress like a virus. If we stop investing into the technology, it doesn't progress. If you stop buying products that use the technology, there's no investment going into it. And if we don't have dev teams investing their careers into this technology, then it doesn't evolve either. So what makes the technology very disruptive is the economics of the technology. And by the way, the economics always win. At the end of the day, if the economics are positive, it wins. If it's not, it doesn't win. So going back over the waves of technology we've had over the last couple of years, digital, what made digital very disruptive from an economic perspective is that it trended the cost of distribution down to zero. So whether I served 1 million customers or 1.5 million customers, my incremental cost of serving was significantly lower than someone that had infrastructure. If I wanted to expand my digital product to another country, my cost of expansion was significantly lower than someone that needed to expand with infrastructure. Blockchain, we've been through the hype of blockchain, and by the way, blockchain hasn't gone away. I don't know if you read this morning, Absa just signed with Ripple as a payments provider. So blockchain reduces the cost of corporate complexity, reduces the marginal cost of corporate complexity. So corporates will leverage the blockchain to do more complexity at a much lower cost point. Artificial intelligence reduces the cost of creation or the marginal cost of creation down to zero. And I'm not talking images and music and videos of cats, etc. I'm not referring to that. R&D, the generation of IP, the design of factories, the process flows, the explosive pattern of a mine, etc. The ability to model not just a few dozen variations of what's going to play out, but hundreds of variations to get to the optimal variation is possible at an incredibly low cost. And then if you combine that with robotics, the marginal cost of production drops to zero or reduces to zero. And typically at this point, we get concerned, what about jobs? And the reality is when we talk about technology and jobs, we can't have a single dimension conversation. Otherwise, every dimension has got it's a one-sided view. You've got to have, it's a multi-dimension, complex conversation. So if you reduce the cost of production close to zero, that means the cost of your product reduces significantly. More people can buy your product. You broaden the economy. In actual fact, you drive more consumption. More consumption drives job creation, just like we've seen over the last 100 years in agriculture. We have less percentage of the population working in agriculture, more absolute numbers, and we're feeding significantly more people as a result of technology. The question also comes up: what about South Africa? Are we going to fall behind because we're not researching? We don't have R&D capabilities, or we're not investing heavily as a country into this, into skills, etc. Interesting research that's coming out, that recently came out, is that the countries or geographies with the best attitude and acceptance and use of artificial intelligence tools are developing economies. And South Africa's ranked, I think, 8th in the world. So if we compare attitudes and acceptance of AI in South Africa versus the attitudes and acceptance of AI in the Nordic countries, our ratios are almost double that. Now, I think a lot more research has to be done as to why this is the case. But I suspect it's because you're placing an incredibly powerful piece of technology in the hands of everybody. Anyone that's got access to one of these has got access to the technology at almost a zero cost. And so there's a tremendous amount of experimentation, and perhaps we may see an interesting leapfrogging, another leapfrogging as a result of this technology in developing economies that typically don't have access to or struggle to get access in the context of the broader population to expensive technology. So it brings me to this point, which is where I started. If this technology is so amazing, why are we seeing such a high, I don't want to call it failure rate, but maybe let me rephrase it. Why is the success rate so low? So in our geography, or in our timeline, Africa, Middle East, and Europe, about 90% of large organizations have got some form of modernization or innovation initiative underway. And in there's a variety of technologies, including artificial intelligence. Less than 30% of those companies will achieve the promised return on investment that they started off to try and achieve. They'll implement the projects on time and on budgets, and people will fiddle with the product, but they don't achieve the promised value. And in actual fact, if you strip this down and you look at AI projects, I heard someone quote this earlier, it's about 5%. And there's a variety of reasons, and I think one of them is materiality. There are lots of activities going on inside corporates, but they're tiny and insignificant. And so corporates are collecting a series of little projects that doesn't move the needle inside the organization. It is exciting because it was a new technology, but it's not sustainable because no one's interested in it. The economics always win. All the other thing that we see is that the organization's strategy is incongruent with the experimentation that's taking place from an AI perspective. And so it brings me back to my point. If the conversation starts with, we need to find a way to bring AI into our business, why I think those projects are going to fail is because the reason to bring AI into your business should be documented and recorded in your strategy. Your strategy defines, do I want to grow? Do I want to become a low-cost producer? Do I want to fundamentally change the relationship I have with my customers? And therefore, it would suggest that the direction in which you send your AI investments should be to accelerate or turbocharge the strategic outcomes you're trying to achieve. So if you're an organization that is focused on driving customer experience and your AI projects are reducing the cost of processes in the back office, you're not going to get the attention of the people that sign checks. And this is the reality of those economics. So before I get into that detail, there's a barrier that plays out before that. And so we see executives struggling to make decisions with regards to these technologies because, first of all, they are making decisions against dated data points. So the market around us is moving at a phenomenal rate. The consumer's attitude and adoption of these products is moving at a phenomenal rate. So we will still hear executives talk about the fact that South Africans are not digitally savvy. South Africans don't use digital tools. They prefer the human touch. That is not true, or at least it's not entirely correct. In actual fact, I don't know if you're aware of this, but 72% of South Africans have got access to the internet. Of those 72%, at a per capita level, we are the heaviest users of the internet in the world. According to data report, South Africans spend 9 hours and 38 minutes on the internet. The global average is under 7 hours. So we are a digitally savvy nation. We are spending time online. We consume a tremendous amount of data. The next thing that are holding executives back and business people back from making the right choices is that our mental models are dated. We are bringing AI into the business and technologies into the business to solve problems or to help run the business how it was run in the past. And what we should be doing is using the tool to fundamentally redesign the business to allow it to operate better, more efficiently, more productive, more income generative than before. So taking an old business model or an old business process and merely overlaying technology onto it perhaps makes your old processes more efficient. That means that if your old processes weren't good, they've just become better at not being good. All right, so we've got to use this moment to redefine business models, profit models, customer models, propositions, etc. And then finally, the process for making decisions is incoherent at times. Organizations lack a system for decision making. And when I say a system, I'm not talking about technology. I'm talking about a structured process to say, this is what I'm trying to solve, and this is how I reverse engineer it into the technology that solves it, if I need technology to solve it. And if that's the technology I need to solve it, then which is the vendor I work with? And then if I know which vendor I work with against the value I'm trying to achieve, what is the cap I should be spending on that technology? So the process of making a decision is actually not very difficult if you have a system for thinking. And we are responding to the hype, getting caught up in the noise, and not following the right signals to get to the right answer. So I think this is now we'll go into a little bit of the detail. So I want to recap and just reemphasize my point is that I am incredibly positive about the technology. I think what we'll do with this technology will fundamentally change how we live, work, and play and make life better. And as I said earlier, if we're on the right side of change, we'll create more wealth, more prosperity for everybody, and more job creation than ever before. It's not going to be easy. It's not just going to happen. But certainly if you don't play, you're out of the game. But at the same time, what's happening is that we get caught up in what it can be, and everyone gets caught up in selling the hype of the technology. And so you can take this amazing technology and create something completely useless with it. So self-solving Rubik's Cube is an incredibly interesting thing, but I can't do anything with it. A self-licking ice cream certainly shows how clever people are, but I can't do anything with it. And this is where we're getting caught up in the technology and forgetting about the value creation. So going back to that value creation, if there's any mathematician or actuary in the room, there's an error in this calc, and it's more anecdotal, this equation, and it's more anecdotal than meant to be used as an actual equation. But I put this together while flying to go see a CEO of one of my clients that they had a lot of money, a significant amount of money, 3 commas in that value, to spend on technology over a 4-year period. And they were experiencing anxiety out of the attempts they tried to spend. They had failed. And now they were under pressure by the board. You were given all this budget. You're not deploying it. And where you've deployed it, you have deployed it ineffectively. And so what I try to demonstrate with this equation, and there's 2 sides to the equation. The left side of the equation says that collectively, if I take the cost-benefit ratio of the technology investment I make, so the cost that it took me to deploy that technology and the value I get, it should be collectively better than the cost that it takes, the cost-benefit ratio of my current business. That's a very obvious thing. But we still see organizations investing into technology, small startups, large corporates, investing into technology, and what they've left with is a more expensive organization doing the same thing. All right, so that's the left side of the equation. That's an obvious one. The right side of the equation refers to the digital or technology dividends that technology can be distilled to. So irrespective of the technology that you use, if you're a for-profit business, irrespective of the technology, the attributes of the technology, the hype around the technology, the coolness of the technology, you're using the technology to solve one or more of 3 potential dividends. Exponential G, exponential P, and exponential X. Exponential G is growth. I leverage the technology to allow me to generate to allow me to generate revenues from new products and services that I innovate. So the technology allows me to innovate, and I create revenue, new revenue and profits as a result of that. The productivity dividend, the P, allows me to reduce the cost at which I operate. So I invest into this technology to find the next lowest cost point in my business or in my industry. And the golden rule of strategy says that all things being equal, if you're the lowest cost producer, you will always be the winner, because your competitors will go out of business before you do. So the productivity dividend is the preferred dividend for South African companies at the moment, because we're in a constrained macroeconomic environment. And then the X is the experience dividend. Can I leverage this technology to fundamentally change the relationship I have with my customers, to get them to come back, stay longer, spend more, and tell others about it? All right, so if you cannot find one of those dividends in the reason why you're investing into the technology, there is no case to invest into that technology. And by the way, those dividends should be defined by your strategy. You shouldn't make it up in the moment. So your strategy will, if you download the strategy of any large organization, these dividends will become very clear. So the investment should be to unlock those dividends. The converse applies. If you have a motivation and all three dividends are visible in that motivation, then it's also going to fail, because it's not possible. Then the organization is a bit schizophrenic. It's all over the place. How can you deploy that one piece of technology that's going to drive growth, reduce the cost of doing business, and drive customer experience as the primary focus of the organization? So you're looking for one or two dividends at most, not all three. Very simple choice. If you convince a CFO of your technology against those dividends, they'll sign the check. So very simply put, we tend to start with the technology, how good the technology, what it does, how it works, where it comes from, who invented it, the cost, etc. You won't get a CEO or a CFO to sign off on your check to buy your product. If you start with the dividends that you're going to generate for the organization, and then reverse engineer that to the technology of choice that allows you to achieve the dividends, then you create understanding. The value of the technology through the business lens becomes super clear. Now, the thing with AI technology is that the technology is changing tremendously quickly at the moment. It's progressing at a rate almost double that of Moore's Law. So the cost-benefit ratio of AI doubles about every 9 months, 7 to 9 months at the moment. So what you have is you've got to bring in another dimension, and it's the feasibility dimension. So the business value speaks to the dividends I spoke about. You know, can we unlock growth? Can we unlock productivity? And can we unlock experience? The feasibility is, it doesn't make sense to deploy it now. Can I deploy it? Do I have the foundational technology? Will it be too expensive? Do I need skills that I don't have? Will I need to constantly reskill? Those are feasibility choices the organization needs to make. And if you overlay the business value and the feasibility value, the closer you get to the top, the better the chance you have of convincing someone to buy your technology. So if I take this value prism, and by the way, the value prism is a Gartner tool. So it's available. It's a free tool that everyone can use. So if we take this value prism and we map the initiatives that are playing out in the financial services sector, this is what it looks like. And you'll see the dividends at the top, color-coded to the numbers I've laid out. And if I strip this down and just look for the productivity dividends against the value prism, you'll see the international and local organizations that are very clear in terms of the initiatives that they are investing into. You'll see a concentration of companies. The higher you go, the more companies are concentrated. That's because the value and the feasibility is super clear. Towards the bottom, it will typically be internal R&D projects, innovation initiatives, where that company is trying to solve a specific problem for them. And you can replicate this. We've done it in, here's an example of healthcare and retail. We recently did it for chemicals, mining, and agriculture. And it just provides coherence as to how you make choices. So if you know this is how decisions are going to be made about a product that you're trying to sell that has AI, or the choices you need to make, then you know how to shape the conversation or ask the questions. So wrapping up on this, what are the themes of advice that perhaps one needs to consider when trying to sell an AI product to a large organization, if you're an AI startup in the business, or if you're a startup that's trying to bring AI into your business? I think the first one, top right, let's start there, is be quite purposeful to shift your mind from hype to pragmatic solutions for the business. So be clear, move away, try and ignore the noise and focus on the signals. Stop reacting to what everyone tells you about AI and be proactive in terms of what you want to solve for, that your business needs or that your client needs. Become very clear on the value. The tech is the tech. The value is what pays the rent at the end of the month. Number two, around ecosystems, is that we tend to want to tinker with the technology. Because it's free, we'll just take someone and say, well, just work on this on Friday afternoons, etc. Then it's going to be a tinkering forever, a collection of little projects. Ring fence people, dedicate them to a project. And if you don't have capacity for that, go find a partner. Someone, I think Ashley Anthony spoke to you earlier today, I saw his name, was in the room. As an example, that company's been around for 10 years. They're not figuring out AI, they're teaching people around the world how to deploy AI. The money you spend on bringing on a partner is cheaper than trying to figure it out for yourself and wasting time to get to value. Bottom left, embrace the mindset that you want to use the technology to be better, to do more better, as opposed to trying to do less cheaper. And I see this specifically in smaller teams, smaller outfits. They think they can use the AI to short-circuit stuff and essentially dilute the proposition to the customer. If that's your mindset, then you don't have a seat at the table because the technology will replace you. It's as simple as that. So the mindset needs to be, how do I bring more proposition to my customer? Do it better, as opposed to the opposite way around. And then the top right is avoid that knowledge decay. Knowledge around AI-related matters is probably decaying at a rate of about 30 to 50% a year, maybe even more. And so if you think you solved something 6 months ago, I'd be a little bit embarrassed to showcase it at the end of this year. It's progressing at a phenomenal rate. That's the experience I've got. Okay? So be quite deliberate in the sense that we're at the beginning. There's a ton of hype, lots of little pet projects. I think we're at the beginning of what is possible. And so this is the start of, I think, a long period of continuous learning, continuous evolution, etc. And I probably wouldn't get caught up in trying to be perfect at the moment. Just, again, always trying to get to the value. And as the technology matures, I think we become more effective at getting to that value. And then finally, if you're thinking about it from a team perspective, someone spoke about shadow AI and shadow tech, and that's true. If you don't give someone direction, they're going to figure it out. If you try and keep them back from using the tool, they're going to use it without you knowing, and I think that puts the entire organization at risk. So the STEP process is a well-recognized process. It's been tested and used across a variety of large organizations, across a variety of sectors, from financial services to healthcare to consulting companies. And you start off by segment the part of your business that you're trying to solve something in. If you know that's where the value is that you need to go solve for. So ring fence that and say, well, this is what we're solving for, all right? And it's not about replacing the task. It's, can I accelerate it? Can I unlock an hour? Someone spoke about saving a couple of hours on a process. That is all valuable. If the primary driver in your business is to run an efficient back office, tick, do that. If you can save 1 hour a day from each staff member, over a year, you've added 1.5 months to your workforce at no additional cost. That's a good dividend, right? Once you've figured out what you want to do and you're starting to get results, then start moving your spare capacity to use that tool a lot more. So in a very controlled way, you figured out you can automate a process, you can find a new way of engaging with the customer, start transitioning spare capacity to use that more effectively. So go from a pet project to something with more value. Once the results are very clear that this thing can scale and can be better done into the organization, teach everyone to do it. What you don't want is a digital part of the business and an analog part of the business. That's a great way to wreck your culture. So teach everyone to use the tool, and when you teach people, they become less anxious about the shift. And then finally, you've obviously got to change your KPI performance issues, your KPI performance metrics inside the business. The business just became, 10%, 12% more efficient. So now make sure you adjust the KPIs according to that. And the outputs of that are really positive. If you drive segmentation, you'll find that you'll get staff ownership, leadership support, people embrace the change, they become less anxious, etc. If the transition is clearly understood, then you'll find that often this fear of job losses is to some extent not entirely correct. And if I had more time, I see that the time's run out, I would share that with you, some views on that. But you probably could repurpose staff. You could deepen people's roles. And what we see is when you automate tasks, people's roles become more strategic. They elevate their contribution to the business. From an education perspective, I mean, it has been proven over and over, the higher the fluency levels of your staff and of your leadership, the better the performance metrics of your company compared to those of companies with lower fluency levels inside the organization. And I think the performance metrics, just adjusting the performance metrics to include AI tools, starts bringing back starts creating that transition inside the business from going from being a business that does technology to a business that is technology. So there is this view, like part of the hype is we're all going to lose jobs, right? Here's just something to think about. If the technology eliminated everyone's jobs, like there's a ton of hype, so who's going to, if that was the case, who then who runs the economy to enable us to consume stuff? Okay, it's a one-dimensional conversation. The other thing that we don't bring into the conversation is regulation. With every general-purpose technology, it's heavily shrouded with regulation. Electricity has regulation. All right, so as an example, if we take a look at the history of tech over the last 80 to 100 years, tech together with good policy has been the primary driver of employment around the world. So economies that adopt technology have more productivity, higher prosperity, and higher employment. Technologies and sectors that shun technology typically have low-cost labor. Right? That's the economics of it. The reality is technology does eliminate jobs. In actual fact, for every job that technology eliminates, we lose another 2 jobs as a secondary effect. However, for every job we create as a result of technology, we create an additional 5 jobs. I know which side of the equation I want to be on here. Based on AI, a couple of clever people at Harvard researched the potential impact of AI eliminating jobs. And they took a database, ONET. It catalogs 1,000 jobs in the US. And each of those jobs have got the tasks that the job needs to fulfill in order for that professional to do the job. So a radiologist has got 30 tasks and subtasks that they need to fulfill to be a radiologist. So they took that ONET database and with the OpenAI scientists overlaid what OpenAI or ChatGPT and other AI tools can do. And what they showed was that about 80% of people in those professions, of those 1,000 jobs, have 10% of the tasks exposed to AI. 19% of them had more than 50% of their tasks exposed to AI. Their conclusion was, however, that it doesn't eliminate the role. It augments the role. And in their research, they referred to augmented intelligence as opposed to artificial intelligence. Anthropic did a very similar study, and they got to almost the identical results. Right? And by the way, if you just look at it from a superficial perspective, in terms of employment, jobs that are exposed to AI versus jobs that are not exposed to AI, we've seen no notable changes in terms of employment levels. The most interesting piece of research that has come out recently, and I'll try and explain this graph, they categorized jobs based on their exposure, jobs that had high levels of exposure to AI. And the jobs with the highest levels of exposure were typically the jobs held by people in this room, white-collar workers, professional people. That's, by the way, the yellow line at the bottom. The jobs with the least amount of exposure was the orange line at the top. And what the research shows is that the jobs with the highest exposure to AI had the highest earnings and growing, and they're at the lowest unemployment levels, and moving in congruency with the other jobs, other job categories. Their conclusion is based on the information available at the moment. Jobs are certainly changing, but there's no evidence that there is a significant shift in job destruction as a result of the AI tool. I'm going to leave it there. Thank you very much.